This evening, the Carter-Jenkins Center is presenting or maybe the last lecture on this sequence of lectures on aggression. This one is lecture 4 and is called Thoughts About Violence Prevention. And then you have the person that's speaking to you. Now let's talk a little bit about prevention of aggression. As you have seen in the previous lecture, in lecture 3, there are a number of large number of preventions that preventive measures that are suggested by the World Health Organization and by different government branches in different countries in terms of dealing with the problem of aggression, with violence, with homicides, with rapes, all kinds of violent behavior. But like the World Health Organization, they mostly address this issue once the problem is there. In other words, when the aggressive act has taken place, and more than the aggressive act, more than the fact that people have become inordinately aggressive and dangerous in that way, and what can be done to bring them back to a more normal-like type of behavior. But you see, that means addressing the problem when the problem is there. It will be the equivalent of treating a malignant cancer when the cancer is there, rather than using measures to prevent the growth of a malignant cancer in the body, and that's what we want to address this evening. In my view, what is really needed is to address the conditions, the situations, the factors that influence human development that tend to create these problems. That is, what is it that creates a condition under which human beings develop inappropriate, aggressive behaviors or are unable to control their aggressive drive? Do remember that normal aggression is in itself not only necessary and certainly not a bad thing, but it has helped the human species to survive, and normal aggression is essential for normal functioning. Now we believe that what triggers inappropriate maladaptive aggression is an extraordinarily complicated problem that is influenced and provoked by a multiplicity of variables and situations. The problem, given human nature, that is the problem of aggression, will never be totally solved. Yet, we believe that many of the abnormal developmental processes that lead to forms of maladaptive pathological aggression could be remedied if dealt with at the right time in development, which is very early on in life and in the family environment. But before we move over there in more detail, let's take a look at the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that is in charge of controlling emotions and aggression. And nowadays we do have an extraordinary amount of knowledge of what in the brain and in the nervous systems in general relates to the problem of aggression, the expression of aggression, the feeling of fear, the feeling of having to fight, the feeling of having to flight, and so on. And all of this is mostly related to the limbic system in the brain. The limbic system only really exists in mammals to the degree that is developed in humans. The only animals capable of wide range of emotions. It is a very complex brain structure, as you will see in a moment, that deals with emotions and related behaviors. And I need to tell you that much of the information that I'm going to present to you is taken from Sapolsky, Biology and Human Behavior, which is a course produced by the teaching company that I will highly recommend for those interested. So, the limbic system comprises a large number of nuclei that communicate with each other, with other parts of the brain, and more especially with the hypothalamus. These various nuclei try at the same time to influence the hypothalamus, and they all want to, by themselves, influence the hypothalamus, excluding the other nuclei, so they are competing in terms of who will influence the hypothalamus. Here you have some basic mammalian structures. You have a cortex that you can see right there at the top of the limbic system, in the more or less in the middle of the graph there. Then underneath is the hindbrain, the brainstem, and then the spine. And this is a very simple scheme to give you an idea of where in the brain the limbic system is located. We're going to give you some more opportunity to clarify that. Now we're going to talk about the limbic system, the structure in the brain that deals with emotions and aggression, with fear, with fight or flight phenomena. And it comprises a large number of different nuclei and structures. Among them are the amygdala, the hippocampus, the septum, the cingulate cortex and gyrus, the hypothalamus, the mammillary bodies, the thalamic nuclei, and the frontal cortex. The amygdala and the septum have both roles in aggression, but they oppose each other. The septum works in opposition to the amygdala, trying to control aggression, the aggressive response of the amygdala. The frontal cortex, which is because of the front of the brain, has among its many functions one that plays a very significant role in inhibiting any form of inappropriate social behavior, and that will include aggression. And it tends to go for the right thing. It tends to do the thing that is right for that social environment, that person, that culture, that religion, and so on. And as such, it tends to restrain the amygdala. Here you have a diagram which shows the different structures. Some of them we have mentioned. But here you have you can see the amygdala. You can see as well the septum. And then you see a number of other structures that are significant in brain function. Here, and this is a diagram taken from the lectures of Sapolsky on biology and human behavior by the teaching company. You see how the connection of the limbic system, the frontal cortex goes to the hypothalamus, mammillary bodies, then to the thalamus, frontal cortex goes to the amygdala, that goes to the hippocampus, that can go up to the fornix and the septum, and so on. There are all kinds of complicated interactions between these different structures. Here you have the part of the brain that are involved in the fear response that we referred to a moment ago. And that, of course, is the amygdala, which is in the middle of that yellow section. The cortex plays a very significant role. And you see the hypothalamus as well, and the hippocampus. Here you have another diagram from Sapolsky lectures. And you can see the amygdala in the square, and the inputs and outputs of the amygdala. And it has, as you see, a filter sensory information, slow type, which means it goes through the frontal cortex and then back to the amygdala, and consequently is processed more intelligently and more in accordance with rational means. You have an unfiltered sensory information, which is goes directly to the amygdala. Amygdala receives pain and will react to it with whatever it is, fear, anger, it depends what is appropriate. Stress hormones influence it, and the amygdala has an enormous influence in the sympathetic nervous system, and that is related to the flight or fight response, glucocorticoids, which are produced in a stressful situation, and of course it has a relation to the motor apparatus, it has a motoric output. Now the limbic system that we are now discussing, we need to add the amygdala, which is a very significant part of it, sends projection to the frontal cortex to do the easier thing, as we already mentioned. Rather than the easier thing, we should say the right thing, the more intelligent response that is processed by the frontal cortex, which is an executive organ of the brain, and process all the information and try to produce the most adequate response. The serotonergic projections go as well to the frontal cortex, inhibiting impulsive behavior. Low serotonin levels are associated with impulsive, thoughtless behavior. So whatever leads to that particular situation creates a problem. Dopamine projections go to the frontal cortex as well, from the ventral tegmentum, and they help the frontal cortex to hold out in order to do the best and right thing, not to respond immediately with what is perhaps easier to do, but the thing that is the most adaptive, the most thoughtful response to the particular situation that is being confronted. Fear, stress, pain, rejection, and frustration decrease dopamine transmission and consequently stimulate aggression. So notice, fear, stress, pain, rejection, and frustration stimulate aggression. Another interesting finding is that, and perhaps somewhat surprising, is that the testosterone role in aggression apparently seems to be quite limited, which is in a way surprising. Glucocorticoids release in moment of distress, as I mentioned to you, and can disrupt the work of the frontal cortex, consequently leading to bad decisions. We need as well to address how very early experiences and stimulation can, and in fact do, contribute to the development of the brain or lack of quality or appropriate development in certain areas of the brain. The brain in human beings doesn't develop just by sheer embryological maturational forces. It requires a variety of forms of stimulation at different periods in the development of the infant for the brain structure to develop to their ideal condition given the genetic potential that it has. When that stimulation is not provided, the quality of the brain will be very significantly reduced. The earlier that happens, the more problems that creates, as you will imagine. And this, as you will see in a moment, have a lot to do with the problems that are confronted by people that for a variety of reasons have become maladaptive in terms of their aggression and can become homicidal and express violent forms of behavior in various ways. We will need to address as well the issue of the role of the mind on brain function and on aggression to some degree, but we are going to do that in greater detail in a later lecture. By mind here, we mean that beyond the anatomical structures in the brain with the functions that they can perform and do perform, the brain has the capacity to acquire memories, to learn from the environment, to identify with the models in the culture, with the parents, and things of that kind. In other words, it's like getting software and placing it in different structures in the brain so that it can be utilized. I always use an example that we have the Broca area and other areas in the brain in order to develop language. That's why we humans have language. But you have to be exposed to language early on in life in order to learn to speak. If you are not exposed to any language, you will be essentially mute. Of course, that never happens in actual life. But if it were to happen, that's essentially what will happen. People won't be able, children will not be able to develop a language. As we know, the language you develop can be any one of a large number of them. It depends which country you are born. If you are born in China and your parents are Chinese, that's what you're going to learn. If you are born in the United States, you will learn English, because that's what you are supposed to. And that's what we're trying to say, that the culture around you will be somehow absorbed into your brain and will influence how the brain functions and responds to a variety of different stimuli. And that's very different from culture to culture. The influence of religion, as you will see, is enormous, and political system that you grow on, the models that you have for identification, the religion that is practiced by your parents and in the culture where you live and so on. All of that, you're not born with any of that. You acquire that in the process of development. And all of that information that is collected and form parts of what people call the mind, then will have a significant influence on your response to all kinds of events. Here you have an interesting diagram that I have referred to. There are, as you see, two different roads. One goes through the cortex, frontal cortex and so on, and consequently is reason, the response goes to the amygdala in a reasonable way, and it tends to detain the tendency of the amygdala to produce a fight or an aggressive response. And there is, of course, the lower road that you see in the lower, that goes directly from the sensory thalamus to the amygdala and produce an immediate response to the emotional stimuli. There is an enormous difference if it goes to the cortex, particularly through the frontal cortex, rather than to the lower road where it's not modulated by your higher level of functioning and understanding and experience. Now this is another scheme that shows what the different structures that we are referring to are located. You can see the prefrontal cortex, you can see where the amygdala is, and you can see several other structures in the brain. And that will give you more or less an idea of what are those brain nuclei and structure that are involved in the process of feeling emotions, and particularly of feeling fear, of feeling aggression, and producing an aggressive and violent response. Or a defensive response, it may be the best thing to do at a certain time. We're talking now of the maladaptive form of the aggressive response, but remember what I said at the beginning, that aggression by itself is not a bad thing, it's necessary, it's a good thing, and has survival value, and is part of being normal when it is reasonably well controlled. Now, we did talk a little bit about the brain and mind interactions. Let me use the computer metaphor. You have in computers and in humans, you have in computers the hardware. And in humans too, you have the different structures that are produced genetically for the human species. And this is an embryological, neurobiological phenomenon. You are born that way. That's your hardware. Comes with you at birth, but it's not finished. it has to develop. It develops well into your 20s. So it continues, the hardware continues to be modified, enlarged, restricted, and things of that kind. And then there is a software in computer. In other words, without the software, the hardware of the computer can do nothing. And without the software in humans, which is what I referred to earlier in terms of what constitutes the mind, and how the culture, the parents, the experience, what you learn, what you develop, mental experiences are like, the knowledge that you accumulate, which includes your religion, your culture, political systems, ego ideals, super-ego standards, all of that is the software, and it has to be acquired in humans. And it is acquired in humans in the family, and it's acquired from the word go, from the moment of birth onwards. And the most significant and perhaps more important developments in this area take place in the first 2, 3, or 3 years of life. If that doesn't happen correctly, then your brain is not of the quality that it could have been. It can't function normally if what you have incorporated into it, in terms of what the behavior is in the culture in which you live, or what kind of parents you have, they are abusive or violent or aggressive or thieves and so on, well, it is very likely that that will become a part of your personality as well. Now, the issue of mind and brain interaction is complex. We develop cultures, any number of cultures, contradictory cultures, cultures that are in conflict with one another. We develop religions of different types, which very frequently are very antagonistic to one another. Each one of them tend to claim that they are the right one and they represent the right God. Then there are any number of philosophical ways of life, approaches to life. There are all kinds of political systems. And all of that, which represents the culture with the different aspects that constitute it, can be transmitted to the next generation. That's not inherited. When you die, all of that disappears. So it's not passed to your children like other things are passed to your children genetically. Your children have to learn it all over again. And this is important because, for example, take the example of the Muslim extremism with the idea that you can convert, if you can convert them with the word, you can do it by the sword, which is an extreme position which for other religion and other cultures is somewhat shocking, to say the least. And yet, for people growing in that extreme form of Muslim, this is normal. That's when they are suicide bombers and, they become a bomb themselves, or they drive a car full of explosives and blow themselves with it and so on. And that's the influence of the culture, what we call, in an ill-defined manner, the mind that influences the brain and how human beings behave. So we're talking about the role of the family in preventing aggression. This is the family's role in brain development that I referred to a moment ago, that it doesn't happen just by itself. It requires external stimulation, a stimulation that mostly comes from the interaction of the mother with the children, whoever plays the mother role with the child and the immediate family and so on. And then of course the family will promote certain ego functions, perhaps more than others, and will promote certain type of superego development depending on the culture, the religion, the ego ideas of that particular family in that particular culture and so on. And all of that obviously will influence the behavior. If it is the wrong kind of attitudes in these different regards, we are going to have a significant problem, as we will continue to explain. Now there is the family role in the development of object relationship. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in the manner of example. There are hundreds of such things that happen in development, all of which are important in terms of what we are discussing. This is perhaps the most important point that I think I can make. And it is that much of what the World Health Organization and these different other organizations or governments are referring to as possible ways of treating the problems of violence and aggression or correcting the problems are based on the erroneous concept that by creating certain organizations or certain programs, you can substitute for what the parents have to do with the children as they grow up in order for the human beings to be normal in all aspects, but particularly in terms of the ability to control aggression and to relate to other human beings. Now, so the parents have the job to raise the children, and as they grow up, they have to do it in such a way that creates a personality that is empathic, that has morals, that knows limits and accepts them, that can control its impulses, whether they are aggressive or sexual, and particularly, obviously, the aggressive one that understands a child that grows into an adult, that understands the rights of others, understand that the individual wants that we have had to be controlled due to the fact that we live in a society that has laws and regulations, and some of what we may want to have belong to others and not to us, and we can take them away from them. Which is what toddlers will do. They see in a toddler group, a toddler has a toy that the other toddler wants, he goes and takes it away from that fellow until he develops a little further and starts to see and understand and develop empathy, so that he realizes that that's that child's toy, not his, and he has no right to take it away. Some people grow without developing that knowledge or that capacity for a variety of different reasons. Now it is clear to me that when a family organization, which essentially really means the parents, but there might be grandparents, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers, and things of that kind, fails to provide the kind of environmental stimulation, education, relationship, love, attention, and genuine concern with the child's growing up process, with their education, with their behavior, what they allow the child to do, what they teach as something that cannot be done or has to be controlled. When they fail to do that, then obviously what will grow up is an extraordinary, abnormal human being, not through any fault of his own. It's the way and the conditions under which he has been raised. Now, such a human being may lack the ability to control himself in more than one way, and particularly in terms of his violent feelings and his aggression. These are things that humans need to acquire developmentally, all these restraints, all this knowledge, all these capacities, in order to overpower any negative impulses that may come to the fore later on for a variety of different reasons. I say we indeed will. If we don't have the controls, then the response may be extremely maladaptive to the social group in which you belong, and it may go as far as being a homicide. So these children growing under such circumstances may otherwise not be empathic, for example, but rather are kind of psychopathic, with no concern for the feelings and the needs of others, because they have not developed any empathy and may be somewhat narcissistic, or the rights of others, and so it is all me, and me. And they go to all kind of irrational extremes for that very reason. Now, add to that in the present conditions of society, where the problem of drugs have become of such an enormous magnitude when you compare it with what existed maybe 50 or 60 years ago, you had a compounding problem, because it can badly affect the parents' behavior as well as the children's behavior. This is particularly so in those cases where all the conditions that we have been describing as necessary to have a successful process of growing up are lacking. So many of these children are in a way defective and very likely to be the victims of these situations under which they grow up. Unfortunately, that has very negative consequences for those around them, the society, and the commission of violent, aggressive actions, inappropriate behavior. These children, as they grow up and become adults, may lack the ability to think that certain things may be very pleasant and desirable, and they may have a very strong wish to obtain them. But that if you think about it properly, these very things that are so attractive and seem to be so pleasant may have the capacity to hurt you, and that they can perhaps hurt other people as well, and consequently it is in your best interest not to go ahead and engage in that behavior, or use that drug, or steal that object, or kill that person, or whatever it is that is coming to the fore. Pleasant as the thought may be when you are overwhelmed by these different feelings and emotions. So this gives you, in this particular area, is a general, somewhat very general idea of what the many situations are that have to do with growing up and the influence it will have in later behavior. Now, given that there is usually not a proper balance in the personality of the people that have grown in the condition that we have been describing, they function mostly on the basis of the pleasure principle, living and functioning according to what they want. The needs, the wants are of such an immediate urgency that it's very difficult for them to postpone it or to control it. So they have no consideration for the fact that they live in a society where there are other human beings that have rights, and that things that belong to these individuals cannot be taken away from them for any reason, and similarly that you cannot behave in an aggressive, inappropriate way towards them. You have to have achieved, which many of these children will not achieve, the proper level of development in their object relationships, which includes the acquisition of what is called a primary object, and we're going to explain that in some more detail, and object constancy. Normally, that's usually accomplished by the age of 14 months, but it is the result of an extremely long process that builds itself through the interaction of the mother with the child. That is what creates the bond that leads to what is called imprinting in animals, but in humans being is called the choice of a primary object. If you have not achieved that, or have achieved it in a faulty manner, your ability to object relate normally is going to be very compromised, and consequently your consent for others may not be normal, and that of course will influence your behavior in a very negative manner towards others. You may, for example, relate to people in what is called the need satisfaction basis, which you see here in the diagram. The need satisfaction type is the first stage in the development of object relationship. In other words, the child accepts the administration of anybody as long as it gratifies the needs that the very young infant, newly born baby, a few months of age, has. Whoever comes and gratifies that need or satisfies that need, doesn't matter whether it is a mother or a stranger or whoever. What is important is the gratification of the need. Now that is through the constant interaction with an object, which is of sufficient quantity and quality, which is generally the mother. Then the child acquires, around the 14th month of life, what is called object constancy, which means now the gratification of the need is not the only thing that is important, but the object that gratifies the need is similarly important, to the point that children after a certain age, if they are hungry and some stranger want to feed them, they will refuse the food temporarily and will start to cry and will not accept anything from the mother. That develops up to the age of 14 months, at which point the object has become extraordinarily important. The object, not only the gratification of the need, but the object itself has become very important. And that's when people refer to having acquired primary object. It's like a dog in a family. The person who plays with him, feeds him, takes care of him, cuddles him, pats him and so on, pays attention to him, will become his primary object. He belongs in the family. There is somebody in that family to whom he responds especially. And if several people call him, he will go to that person because he has developed a primary object, more important than any other object. Now that's important. Object constancy is enormously important because now it's not the need by itself that is important, but the object has become very important. And I mean incredibly important. Now if you haven't achieved that, but you have achieved that in a faulty manner, your ability to object relate normally is going to be very compromised. And as I said, your concern for others is not going to be normal. So, the other thing that is important to understand is that this object constancy, which means the object is valued by itself now, whether it gratifies the need or not. It's like a dog, that the owner that he got attached to may not be all that nice, but now he's attached to it and he can't help it. It's the owner. Is the person that he would like to be close to and so on, and maybe in fact be mishandled and mistreated by. But the quality of that first relationship be a model for all other relationships. Now that cannot happen anywhere else but in the family. And if that hasn't happened, you have, as we have said now several times, a situation where you have an extraordinarily abnormal situation which makes it dangerous in terms of the ability to control impulses, to value the objects, to be empathic, to put yourself in their place, to be able to understand that if you hurt them, they suffer and things of that kind. So it modulates the quality of what happens later on, that first relationship to your mother, and that, as we said, will be the pattern for all later relationships. Where that one is effective, all other forms of relationship later on are going to be defective due to a large number of variables. All this is incredibly complex and is influenced by a large multiplicity of factors. And consequently, there are variations from one human being to the next depending on their developmental experiences. Normally, as I said, object constancy and a primary object is obtained or achieved by the age of 14 months, and as I said, is the result of a very long process developing through the interaction between the mother and her child, or whoever plays the mothering role. Having reached object constancy early in life, usually in relation to one's mother, modulates, as we said, not only the quality of what happens in that relationship, but more important, as I have just mentioned, is that that will be the pattern for all later relationships. Where that first one is effective, all other relationships of necessity are going to be defective for a large number of reasons. Let's now talk briefly about another aspect, as a manner of example, as I said earlier, of the development of normal object relationships and the conditions that may be necessary for that to happen. I'm referring now to the libidinal development of human beings and more particularly to the move from what is called the primary narcissistic stage, where the self is what is affected, all the cathexis are in the self, to the process of moving such cathexis from the self to the object world. The first stage in that libidinal development is what Freud called autoerotism. And what that means is that the child has no concept of the self when he is born. All he knows is the different sensations that he experiences as his needs manifest themselves. If he's hungry, he feels hunger and he's a mouse, so to say. If he has pain somewhere, that's what he is at that point. He doesn't know anymore about it. He wets himself, it's wet, that's the sensation that he has. But all of these are isolated experiences. Each one is in its own right, so to say. It's not related to anything else. Because the child has no concept of the self, so it's just an experience at that point. But from there, he moves gradually to develop an image of himself, putting together all these different and isolated early sensations as belonging into his body, and specifically to what part of the body and so on, and he develops a body self-image, where all these different sensations are now referred to, and they are part of that body image, and not isolated experiences. When he has done so, in other words, he has cognitively acquired a body self, he has reached what is called the primary narcissistic stage. All the cathexis goes to the body, not to the isolated experiences. So the cathexis go to the self, and if it's worth to stay there, then object relationships are damaged because the cathexis never move to the objects as they should do in the course of normal development. If that is the case, you are detained in the primary narcissistic stage, which means you really cannot care for anybody but yourself. That of course means too that you never reach object constancy, that you are stuck at the need satisfaction level, that you can only use objects for the gratification of your own impulses, drives and needs, for your pleasures and so on. In the normal course of events, the primary narcissistic stage will be superseded by the cathexis, moving very gradually to the objects, which make the object again very important. That too is a very complex process, because the child in the primary narcissistic stage has a feeling of omnipotence. In other words, if he cries because he's hungry and his mother feeds him, he thinks he brought it about magically. He had no idea of the object, how they bring the food to him. In his mind, he magically solved the tension, because he has, of course, no awareness of the objects and the role they play in his life at this point. It is thus not related to something out there at this stage, something out there that is responding to his cries. In the primary narcissistic stage, there is a body self, an image of the body, and at the same time there are these feelings of omnipotence. But as his development progresses, given that his needs don't get always satisfied immediately, there are delays in the gratification of his needs, he starts to realize that something out there has to intervene for him to feel relief. And that is why the cathexis will move to the object world. Then the object gradually becomes extraordinarily important, and from then onwards, whenever the object loves you, praises you, is not angry with you, is not punishing you, is not telling you that you are a bad boy because of your bad behavior, but just the opposite, you receive what is called secondary narcissistic cathexis. For that to occur, you have to move your cathexis from the self to the object and make the object extraordinarily important. Once that happens, he has reached secondary narcissism. That is the return of the cathexis that he has invested in the object world when the object is nice to you and is important, and that's an important part of the bond to your different objects. It is important when human beings are growing up to establish that bond and to receive that feedback of secondary narcissistic cathexis for the regulation of the feelings of the well-being. Without that, how are they going to regulate the feelings of well-being? So as you see, that is an important part of the development of object relationship. Later on, as you continue to grow, you can regulate your self-esteem by your own means, by your own methods. In other words, the role that the object plays up to that point, your superego will play later on, in the sense that it rewards you with positive feelings if you are a good person and follow your ethic, moral, and ideas. But for that, you need to have good models for identification. If they are not, the kind of superego that you develop is different and may be quite abnormal and permissive of behavior that are not acceptable in a normal social group. So obviously, that is not the case. There will be many deviations from normal development, and that may create personality, a personality that has developed many severe abnormalities in different areas. This may be so particularly in those areas that may have to do with the quality of the object relationships, the ability to see people as separate, or in being empathic and able to feel what they feel if they get hurt, and things of that kind. Of course, such people are potentially very dangerous in terms of their aggression, given the many lacks that we have referred to that they have. That should give you a kind of idea of the many roles that the family has to play in the development of the child, so that he has the right kind of attitude to himself, to others, to his morals, to his ego ideas, to his impulses, can control his aggression, can be, in fact, kind when necessary, and things of that kind. Now, the family role, of course, is important in terms of providing healthy models for identification. And as we said, that process starts at the family level, but then continues later on at the community level. There is as well the family role in the development of ego ideas. What will be your ego ideas? This usually doesn't come out of the blue, but it's part of the culture in which your parents have grown and live. It's part of the religion, if they have any. It's part of the kind of normal adaptation to a social group, if they have done so. If they haven't done so, they can pass that on to you, and your ego ideas may be extraordinarily abnormal and in general create dangerous situations. There is as well that we have referred to the enormous role the family plays in education. Generally speaking, and in schooling, learning, acquiring knowledge. There is the family's role in teaching controls over impulses, what is permissible, what is not. There is a family role in setting and teaching limits, in teaching right from wrong, in rewarding good behavior, restricting or punishing bad behavior, and so on. And as you can imagine, if any of this goes wrong, we have a problem. And it's a problem that will have to do with the form that violence and aggression manifests itself, among other things. There is the role played as well, because the family organization is such an important thing, and there are such high rates of divorce all over the world. In this country, the United States, is something like 60 to 65% of marriage end in divorce within 7 years. There is as well the role played, as we said, by drugs, by alcohol, by promiscuity in dysfunctional families, which will include abuse, neglect, the potential for identification with inappropriate behaviors and abusive behaviors, and so on. And there is, of course, the role that gangs play when they substitute for families that are dysfunctional and meaningless to the child. So he goes to a gang, a group that is extraordinarily abnormal and generally pretty violent and dangerous. There are other factors. The role of poorly thought out welfare is an extraordinarily important factor. Let me explain that. Those groups or organizations that try to create programs to be applied later on in life to remedy the lacks that took place at different points early in development, as I said, are not likely to work. In short, in my opinion, the deterioration of the family organization is what, in my view, has led to what we are now, a situation that is destroying our society and culture, and is making life dangerous for many. This is so because what we have described produced a large number of people with severe problems in terms of controlling their behavior in more than one aspect. And in their ability to restrain from immediate gratification of their wants. If they can postpone the need for the gratification of their wants and the immediacy that that may have, then that is a problem because it leads to all kinds of abnormal behavior, particularly at times when it has to do with controlling their aggression. Unfortunately, all of this is being compounded by politics. And let me explain what I mean. When you create the situation in which you are now in this country, and I believe the same is true in Europe and many other places around the world, where governments create what I think are ill-designed and ill-thought welfare programs, what they are doing in many cases is consolidating the damage that such ill-thought, so-called welfare programs will create. And I don't want you to take me wrong. I think there is a place for welfare for people who, through no fault of their own, can help themselves. Obviously, we need to help them, whether it is because they are sick, because they have fallen in hard times, and things of different types. What I mean, though, by the damage that the ill-thought, so-called web programs create, is this. You take several groups of people in this country, that for a variety of complex reasons and circumstances tend to have at times very poor skills in terms of creating reasonably healthy structure in their family organization. Many such women in such groups become pregnant and have children from different men. These men don't take any responsibility for their children. They procreate or give and don't give a hoot about it. What the government does when they support this kind of situation indefinitely is create an extraordinary, abnormal situation that has terrible consequences. When they give money to these poor people, and the more children they have in this way, the more money they get, let alone housing, health services, and food stamps, and a variety of other things, and many other welfare programs. All of this is done on the basis of what is called compassion, social justice, distribution of wealth, and so on. What is really being done is an enormous amount of damage, because politicians are condemning these particular social groups to miserable lives for generations to come. Instead, they should be trying to do something that will create healthy family organizations that are functional and capable of raising normal human beings. They are in fact financing a type of family structure that have very little resemblance to a normal family. This compounds the problem because many of these mothers that don't have husbands and have many children from any number of different men, as we described, are really not capable of being good mothers. They are somewhat damaged by the very situation for the most part. Some of them might be, but in these circumstances, that has to be a minority. Thus, what politicians are really doing is condemning them to a miserable and unproductive life with no self-esteem or pride. Not only are they doing that, but are in fact creating the conditions under which the same situation is going to be constantly recreated and repeated. Those human beings that grow under such conditions, like boys growing in that environment, without fathers, will tend to behave like their parents, like their fathers. They will make women pregnant indiscriminately, not giving a hoot about it or about the children that are born that way. The girls growing under such conditions frequently will do what the mothers did. This then destroys the potential of these people for becoming normal, capable, proud, functional human beings that are not only well adapted to the type of society in which they live or of which they form part as an integral, constructive, and productive part of it. This is just an example. There are many such examples where governments with their ill-thought welfare programs are not only destroying their potential, but giving out as well authorization for people to misbehave. These children do not have a responsible father, and the government doesn't do anything to try and identify this father and make them responsible for the child that they have procreated. Think what kind of human being will develop out of such situation. They have to have a lot of holes in their morals, in their ideas, in their ability to get educated, in the motivation to become a valuable and constructive person that will do well for himself, herself, and his potential family, and enjoy and develop the many talents that they may have. Instead, many of these unfortunate people will be prone to do drugs, drink, and be irresponsible and have a miserable life. We see examples of this constantly, yet we seem totally blind to these problems, totally blind to this present-day world. Politicians seem totally blind to what they are doing. In many cases, they don't actually care because what they are doing is enslaving these poor people to vote for them, thus guaranteeing their political survival. And that is why they really do it, to make them dependent in order to get their votes. There are close to 50 million in America, million people in America that are forced at times for circumstances or that get seduced into this situation. There is only one name for this, and it is political insensitivity and corruption. Now, this started in this country with rulers in the Great Depression in 1930, and there was a program called Aid to Dependent Children that was original for children whose father had died. But that enlarged itself to the situation where it had nothing to do with the father. It was the more children you had, the more money you got, the more welfare you receive, and of course that increased exponentially. It was Johnson war on the poverty in the 60s increases it, and Clinton in 1992 campaigning his presidential election being promising to end welfare as we know it, and in 1996 signed welfare reform, that is the end of welfare as we know it, which means it put a limit on the number of years that you can receive and live under this condition, forcing people to become functional in their society, to get jobs, and to raise their families in an appropriate manner. American welfare is not a principality. It is said to be a vast empire bigger than the entire budgets of almost every country in the world. There are in this country about 185 federal means-tested welfare programs, most jointly financed and administered with the states. The best estimate of the cost of the 185 welfare programs in 2010 was 700 billion, but according to the Heritage Foundation, counting state spending, it reached as much as 900 billion. This data was taken from the Carlson Center for Public Policy. Now, this is a country that is, like most other countries in the world, going through an economic crisis of incredible proportion. And that is spending an enormous amount of money that it doesn't have. It has to borrow. And that is an irrational situation that cannot be maintained by individuals, by societies, or by nations indefinitely. It will destroy everything as we know it. So that's the role of government and the role of politicians. Let me read you some comments that appear in the internet at different times. This is a comment from somebody who said to have work in Section A housing here in the state of Michigan. He wrote, what was worse was how you would hear young adults say, why should they work? This was how their parents lived too. It has become a lifestyle, and many people have learned that the system can make it so that they don't have to try to contribute to society. Instead, they expect society to pay their way, and with such an attitude, they essentially destroy themselves. Somebody else said, I work in Section 8 in Michigan, in housing, for a while. And it made me sick, he said, when I saw the game some people play with our tax money. More people play the system than use it to better the situation. When they would find out they had to actually pay rent if they had a job, then they quit their job so that they did have to pay their way, the country. I saw moms who would pop out babies and neglect them, but they should claim the welfare check that child helped them to claim. This person said, welfare is supposed to be a safety net in an emergency, not a lifestyle choice. There are too many people who are second or even third generation welfare recipients who have no intention of ever getting or keeping a job. They never had to. The government gives them spending money, place to live, money for their utilities, food stamp, free medical and dental work, and free daycare, although why they need daycare if they don't work is very difficult to understand, right, this person. Another one said, in a place that housed about 100 families, I would say I only saw about 5 or 10 families who use the system to get back on their feet and to try and do something to contribute to the society, like most tax-paying Americans do every day. And so there were many such comments by people who apparently knew the system and were describing their experience. This, to some degree, have been controlled. Clinton tried very hard to do that by placing limits on the amount of time that you can be on this type of welfare. But there have been up and downs, and this is clearly a problem that is ill thought and is doing an enormous amount of damage to a lot of human beings that live in such societies under such conditions. And that's what I had for tonight. This is the Carter-Jenkins Center. You can see what it is and what its aims are. And there are many other programs you can see. You can see there where you can go on the web page, and that will give you access to hundreds of lectures on mental health. Thank you for your attention.